Hello, my name is Will Milner, and today we're going to be taking a look at a case study done by the Lean Enterprise Institute called Herman Miller's Experiment in Excellence. So over the course of this presentation, what you can expect to learn is a brief history about Herman Miller, and then we're going to kind of dive into their lean journey and how they got to where they are today. And then we're going to take a look at how lean culture saved Herman Miller. So starting off, we're going to talk about their history. And as a company, it began in 1905, and it was known as the Star Furniture Company back then. And then in 1923, it was bought and renamed Herman Miller after the man who bought its father-in-law, named Herman Miller. And it was then headquartered in Zeeland, Michigan, where that is still where the headquarters is located today. And it is currently the second largest office furniture manufacturer in the world, and really took off in the 1960s and actually laid the blueprints for what would become cubicles back in the 1960s. So now we're going to kind of dive into Herman Miller's lean journey. It began in 1995 when a man named Ken Goodson, who was the manager of Herman Miller's IMT facility, got approval to look into the Toyota production system that was turning a lot of heads because it was becoming so successful, and they're really starting to look at it as an alternative to the traditional batch production assembly line that was so typical in American industry. And so Goodson contacted Toyota several times and never really heard back, but he did find a local Toyota automotive supplier that was willing to teach Toyota production system principles to Herman Miller in exchange for some free manpower on their Kaizen team. So Herman Miller sent 2 employees over to work at the Toyota automotive supplier, and in return, they were taught how to implement some lean production principles because they worked on the Kaizen team. And so this led to a surprise visit from the Toyota Supplier Support Center's manager, Hajime Oba, and he took a tour of the facility, and after one visit told them that he would be able to take multiple lines with 126 employees and turn it into one line that worked 2 shifts with 16 workers and have the same output. And so that was a lofty goal he set for Herman Miller, but in the end, he agreed to help Herman Miller, and in return only asked that they pay it forward by helping other companies transition to lean practices. And so the way they helped was that they sent people to the facility every other week for 3 years, and Mr. Oba himself would even come for Friday reviews and look at the progress that they had been making. And so their goal was to make the pedestal line a value stream that you could stand in one spot and see the whole system from start to finish, which is a pretty lofty goal. So here's a quote I found from Ken Goodson, who was the man that started lean principles at Herman Miller, and I think it's very appropriate to lean principles, particularly the Toyota production system. And so never in that time, I don't think, did anyone ever answer a direct question with a direct answer. They always asked questions back, forcing us to come up with solutions on our own. And that's a really important piece of the Toyota production system, in that you can always be making improvements. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you think you have an answer to a question, you need to reevaluate that, because there's definitely there's a change you can make, no matter how small. And so when their 3 years was up, Toyota told them that they were kind of ready to do this on their own. And so Herman Miller took the experience that they had at the IMT facility, and they went to work implementing it in all 13 facilities that were used by Herman Miller. And so one of the ways they did that was they started a training program called Training Within Industry that focused on work team leaders. And so they would have these workers come, and they spent a lot on the front end in education. And They had education at all levels so that no one really left out of the process, and everyone was able to be involved later on. And some of the ways they did that was they even had management come and they would do the jobs like unloading the trucks and working on the line so they could see as they were making these changes what more improvements they could make. Um, and so after a little while, they brought all the top management to a facility that they had just built 4 years prior, and it was empty now because they no longer needed it because they had combined a lot of space and were able to do more input actually than they had with far less space. So that was a big indication to management that these all the time they'd put into this so far was worth it. Um, and so this is kind of typical of a lot of companies trying to get into the Toyota production system. They start out with an avalanche of changes that are easy to spot. For instance, their chair lines that once took up 6,000 square feet of floor space now only occupied 3,500 square feet. So you're going to notice if a few thousand square feet open up in your facility for room for you to grow. And so in the beginning, there's a lot of changes that you can see, but as you kind of get into it, your progress plateaus, and that's where a lot of companies dip out and say that they've done all they can do. But really, there's always changes, and it's important to stay focused on the little changes that you can make. So, for example, Ken Goodson was saying that 3 or 4 seconds is a huge change at Herman Miller now. And here's a quote. It says, "It took us 2 days to move a screwdriver 2 inches, and I view that as a tremendous victory." So that is his way of saying that even though the changes may be small, they add up over time. And as an example, on one chair line, Herman Miller employees completed over 1,000 Kaizens in 1 year, and the average impact of that one Kaizen was 0.5 seconds, which might not seem like much, but the cumulative results was a 60% increase in capacity and an annual savings of more than $1 million. So while the Kaizens may have been small, the changes they implemented were an average of 0.5 seconds, a half a second, but it added up to savings over $1 million. So it's important that even after you stop seeing those initial changes to stay focused on your initial goal. In some ways they were able to achieve the success that they did was that they installed an and-on cord on all of their lines, which enabled all of the employees that they had trained in problem solving to be able to stop the line when they saw a problem and come up with a solution rather than just pushing through the problem. They also converted to a one-piece flow instead of batch production, which allowed them to have a lot less inventory and save a lot of money that way. And then they combined a lot of models onto lines. So by color coding parts and using the Kanban system, they were able to mix models and colors and do their jobs much more efficiently. And they also had each work team had an A3 to focus on Kaizen work. And so they would write down the problems that they saw and the solutions once they saw a problem, and they would have weekly meetings to go over their problems and then come up with a solution together to fix it. And then they were also able to 5S all of their facilities. And so Ken Goodson points out that they would not have been able to make it past the initial phase of lean had it not been for the management that wanted to see it through to the end. So having that commitment from the start is a really good way to be able to push through that plateau and see the changes that really come from the Toyota production system once you get into it and several years into it, because there's always changes you can make. And management started doing weekly reflections that allowed them to all sit down in the same room and discuss what worked, what didn't work, and how to move forward. So they were able to really hone in on their goals, and it was always a fluid process moving forward. They weren't always stuck. trying to get to an unreasonable goal because they knew where they were at all times. And so, looking at how lean principles saved Herman Miller during the economic recession in the early 2000s, Herman Miller was in the middle of restructuring to make way for the new lean culture. And since they were already in the process of implementing these principles, they were able to keep workers on as problem solvers rather than line workers. And many of the changes that you can see today at Herman Miller came about during a time when many companies were having to lay off workers. So it just goes to show that when you have the respect for the workers that comes from the Toyota production system, and when you have the involvement at all levels, you're able to kind of push through crises and come out stronger on the other end. And now we're going to look at a few charts that kind of show the progress of Herman Miller over their 10-year lean journey. If you look right here at the second one, you can see safety incident rates. They went down 80% as they were implementing these lean procedures. So all of the different changes they made really helped safety along with their numbers. So they were more efficient and a lot safer. And then they became 20% more reliable with their suppliers and with the people they were selling to. And so they were able to get up to 100% reliability, and were always on time, and sometimes even ahead of time according to schedule. And so these next two, inventory turns and their square footage, their inventory turns went up while their space they needed went down. And usually you wouldn't put those two together in your head. They don't go naturally together, but when you can kind of combine lines and see the improvements you can make and try to get hands off the product and get it through quicker, you can turn around the inventory much faster without needing a lot of resources put into it. And then finally, their quality, they were having 9,000 defects, and they went down to 1,000 product defects. So that is a huge improvement. They said in the case study that they were having to sometimes repaint cabinets up to 3 times, which can really add up in costs and time. So all around, some major improvements from the company over the decade. And so as a summary, Herman Miller was able to implement the Toyota production system with the help of Toyota. And in turn, they were able to help a lot of other companies transition to this system, and are continuing to this day to help companies transition to the Toyota production system. And lean culture is it's a change that takes time. It's not, you can get all of those immediate benefits, but if you really want to have the culture change and see the long-term effects of going lean, then it's going to take time, and it's a commitment. So remember that results may be small, but they can add up to big results and savings. And then finally, lean principles must involve all levels of an organization in order for real change to occur. So like they had management come and do jobs for people who are unloading and loading the trucks and on the line, they also had the workers go off and really invest in that education that gain respect from all employees for all positions. And so to do it properly, you really have to include all levels of the organization. So thank you for paying attention, and I hope you were able to learn as much as I did from Herman Miller.